What's up, team? Welcome back to This Week in Things I Care About for the week of July 4th, 2026. Happy Independence Day. It's the 250th Independence Day here in America, so I'm going to be going out to a beach to do some fireworks with some family and friends in just a couple hours, actually. But I wanted to record this now just so I could get it done. This will be the second to last This Week in Things I Care About that I won't be doing at home. I'm going to be flying back actually next Saturday on the 11th. So until then, I'm here in Washington still and splitting some time up in Canada. And yeah, let's just talk about some of the things that have been going on this week. So I'll briefly talk about the World Cup. Been watching some of the games. It's been actually quite entertaining. My family is into it, and it's kind of the big thing going on in the culture right now. So kind of fun to watch it, even though I'm not a super big football guy. But at the very least, there's some exciting news. So the U.S. and Canada, who are obviously co-hosting along with Mexico, all got to a round of 16, which is cool. Unfortunately, Canada lost this morning. I watched the Morocco game. Morocco was won 3-0. So Canada is out, but it's really good. They did very well for themselves. Canada, not traditionally a super big uh, name in football, so very cool. The U.S. is still in, and they're going to be facing Belgium. So we'll see how that goes. And then Mexico is still in as well, having taken down Ecuador. So yeah, pretty cool tournament, and we'll keep watching it as time goes on. The other big tournament that's going on right now is MSI, the Midseason Invitational for League of Legends. So that's been really fun to watch. The play-in stage is completely finished now. So there were a few teams in the play-ins, but that was basically a foregone conclusion. One of the teams in the play-ins was T1, which is probably the most famous team in League of Legends history, Faker's team from South Korea. Everyone knew that they were a shoe-in to win, so they did win. Every series in the play-in stage was a 3-0, so they were all pretty much stomps. And T1 beat Team Liquid to make it to the main stage. So we're in the main stage now, and round one of the main stage has been much more exciting. We've had two series go to 5 games, which is awesome. And so T1 BLG just happened last night. BLG won 3-2, but it was a super close series. They just got outdrafted in the final game. Lion, who's the number 1 seed from North America, took down Furia 3-0, Furia being the Brazilian representatives this year. So North America still winning that rivalry. So Lion will move on to the next round. And then we had probably the most exciting series was G2 versus Top Esports. G2 being the number 1 European seed, Top Esports being the number 2 Chinese seed. Top Esports was up 2-0 in a best of 5, and G2 reverse swept them. It's only I think they said it was the 6th time ever that there's been a reverse sweep in International League of Legends history, which is kind of crazy because it sounds like there should be more than that over the course of the entire history of International League of Legends for the last 15 years, 16 years. But no, I guess there's only been very few. I think they said 6. So super exciting series. Massive comeback from G2. So G2 is going to move on. And then the last series was HLE, which is Hama Life Esports. That's the number 1 seed from Korea, and Team Secret, which is a team from the LCP, which is the Southeast Asia, Oceania, Japan region. And that was also a 3-0, which surprised no one. So the next series in the main stage are going to be really exciting because we have HLE G2 and T1, or not T1, BLG and Lion in the next stage, which is awesome. And then in the losers bracket, because it is double elimination, we have T1, who very likely will beat their opponent, Top Esports, Furia, and Team Secret. So very exciting stuff. My pick'ems are kind of screwed. You can do like a pick'ems thing, kind of a, a you fill in your own bracket as a prediction. And I predicted T1 to win their series. It's the only one I got wrong in the first round, but it screwed up my whole pick'ems because now my whole lower bracket is messed up because T1 is in the lower bracket instead of BLG. But otherwise, I think very likely my pick'ems will be accurate. So my prediction is that Lion and G2 will end up going to the lower bracket. So we'll have BLG and Hanwha Life Esports in the winners final on the top side of the bracket. And then in the lower side of the bracket, we will end up with T1 and likely G2 being in the losers finals or losers semifinals. And then the loser of HLE and BLG will probably face T1, and then there will be the grand finals with the winner of those two matches. So cool tournament, very exciting. I like watching International League because it kind of gives us a sense of where the teams are. It looks very much like Korea is dominant, though T1 did lose to BLG, but BLG tends to do really well at midseason invitational, and then their Worlds performance leaves something to be desired a lot of the time. So, I mean, T1 is the defending world champions. Wouldn't surprise me if they did a lower bracket run and won MSI, though I think it's more likely that either BLG or HLE wins MSI and gets their automatic qualification to the World Championships. The World Championships are in North America this year, which is very exciting. I have put myself in the queue for tickets to go to the Swiss stage matches. Hopefully I get tickets to go to some of those, but we'll see what happens. And yeah, it should be very exciting regardless of whether I get to go or not. It's cool that we're having it here on home turf. MSI is taking place in Korea this year. In other sort of nerd-related news, I'll just quickly mention that I've seen a lot of stuff about The Last Airbender Season 2 on Netflix, and people do not like it. I did not watch the first season, but I love the original animated show, and I already felt like the live action wasn't going to be very good just from the trailers and things, and we've already been burned by Last Airbender live action. So I wasn't super confident that it was going to be amazing anyway, but reception to the first season was pretty good, all things considered. And so with the second season, there was obviously room for the show to kind of take off and build up its own reputation, but it doesn't seem to have done so. People are pretty critical of it. Has not been doing very well from the audience perspective. Also, we got some unfortunate gaming news this week, which was that PlayStation announced that they will no longer be doing physical games on discs starting in January of 2028. A lot of people are really upset about this. The consensus online is that this is a horrible idea and that PlayStation are basically shafting the fan base. And ultimately, I think what this comes down to is it's a gamble from PlayStation's part, because the vast majority, they clearly have data showing that the vast majority of their sales come from digital. There are costs associated with physical distribution, including, obviously they have to go through retailers, manufacture the boxes, manufacture the discs, so on. And they can keep all of that extra money that they would be spending otherwise if they sell the game digitally at the same price. So they're basically thinking, if they switch to all digital, it's not going to impact the bottom line enough to worry about it. I understand the hesitation from the general audience, especially people that have been playing video games for a long time, like me. I personally haven't purchased a physical game in a very long time, but I know people that still do purchase games physically and are very passionate about that. And I do understand the need for preservation of video games. Um, and so I can understand why it would be that would leave a sour taste in people's mouths to have physical games no longer be an available option. I personally feel as though the solution to this would be for PlayStation and then, by extension, Xbox and by extension, Steam and Nintendo to have ways to create physical versions of those games if you choose to do so and you want to front the cost yourself. So, um, PlayStation and Xbox and Nintendo necessarily wouldn't be making the physical games, but if you wanted to do so, you could take the game that you wanted, the digital version, and you could put it onto a physical disc or cartridge or drive or whatever you wanted to do to preserve that game. And I know there are like logistical issues with that. I'm not super familiar with the technical side of all of this, but we know that we're going full digital. It's only a matter of time. Even if the public backlash delays the announcement from PlayStation from 2028 until like later 2030 or whatever, it will happen eventually. And so it's a pill we have to swallow. And so there will be discussions about how we're going to preserve some of these games moving forward. Um, and for me personally, I do still cherish the games, the physical copies of games that I have, but I think in there was a transition for me. I think it was really like the Steam era where I started to transition away from needing physical copies of games and I was okay with everything being digital. Um, for number one, for the convenience, number two, for the storage, and number three, because honestly, some of these games are so large that you would have a hard time fitting them onto a disc. And so a lot of the time you're having to install these games anyway. My mind goes back to like, even the PS3 era. There were games that we had to install where only a portion of the game was on the disc. And so I get where people are coming from. I get the hesitation. I'm totally on board with preserving games. I think it's really important. And I don't think that it's fair for us to purchase a game and then be able to have that license revoked at any time. Though when you do purchase a game and if you read the end user license agreement, it does indicate that this is something that can happen. And so this is a risk that you're taking when you purchase a game digitally. So I think it's a more nuanced argument than people are necessarily giving it credit for. I'm of the opinion that it's inevitable that we're going digital only and we have to accept that this is true in some capacity, though we can try to find ways to mitigate the negative side effects of going digital only by hopefully finding ways to be able to preserve games digitally ourselves or by pressuring Sony and Xbox and Nintendo to give us methods by which to preserve those games. Um, it just feels like we're entering an era where um, digital only is inevitable. And honestly, the vast majority of playtime on games in the modern era is on live service games, games with routine updates and patches and things like that. And so having a game on a disc for something like that doesn't make sense because they're constantly updating the game anyway. And so the disc is effectively obsolete within months, probably, of the game being released. And so even if we are given the option to have physical games for some games, obviously single player games, narrative focused games that don't necessarily need those patches and updates in order to function, um, these sort of live service games, like you're not going to buy Fortnite on a disc. You're not going to buy League of Legends on a disc. You're not going to buy a lot of these games on a disc. You're going to have to download them to your console. And so, or your PC. And so there's more to this than I think people are giving it credit for. I think the knee-jerk reaction from a lot of people is this is a horrible idea universally, and we should be angry about this. And my opinion is you're absolutely allowed to be upset about it and have criticisms about it and try to put forward solutions for how to fix it. But you also have to accept the reality of the situation, which is that we are moving into digital only, and we just have to find solutions for how to navigate that reality instead of trying to constantly push back on this reality that we're inevitably going to enter. Um, so that was one unfortunate piece of video game news. The other, which has actually been going on for a couple weeks now since like Summer Game Fest, is that Xbox is talking about shutting down a bunch of studios and doing layoffs and things like that. I saw a headline that Arcane Studios might be shutting down. They're currently working on a Blade game. Superhero games are in real trouble, by the way. Between Wonder Woman, Blade, Suicide Squad getting shut down, and a bunch of other games in that same category. We don't know anything about this Captain America Black Panther game that's supposed to be coming out this year. It's like these games are really in trouble. I think in the last decade or so, there was a huge push to get some of these big AAA superhero games out. And with the success of games like the Batman Arkham series and Marvel Spider-Man by Insomniac, there was a huge investment into these games thinking that they were going to be massive hits, but they haven't necessarily been always massive hits. We've had some duds with, Gotham Knights and Suicide Squad. Those obviously wanted to be like more live servicey type games. People didn't like those. Avengers is another great example of a game that I personally loved. Avengers was one of my favorite games the year it came out, but it was bogged down by this live service skeleton that it was built around, and that eventually ruined it. Even though the single player stuff was great and the game was really fun to play, it just couldn't exist under the weight of its own ambition. And so at this point now, it kind of feels like unless you're Insomniac making Wolverine and Spider-Man, you're kind of dead in the water. And to be honest, I don't know if Wolverine is really going to be that successful either. Just because I don't think it has the sticking power of something like Spider-Man. We'll see what happens, but I'm just not 100% confident that that game's going to be that successful. I hope it is. I hope it's great. But I don't have full faith in it. So hearing about this Blade shutdown, again, off the back of the Wonder Woman cancellation by Warner Brothers, and the unfortunate closure of Monolith, which was a huge blow because I loved the Shadow of Mordor games. So it just feels like we're maybe moving away from this superhero thing, and potentially that it's going to return back to being sort of a more niche market for video games. I think there's lots of creative space for superhero games. I loved, for example, Marvel's Midnight Suns was my game of the year. The year that game came out, one of my favorite games ever. I love that game, but it didn't sell very well. People just weren't excited about Midnight Suns. But the point is like it was a very creative game. It wasn't a traditional open world action superhero game. It was trying something different, trying something new, and um, I think there's room for those kinds of games. Maybe lower budget. Midnight Suns clearly had a pretty inflated budget, and Marvel thought it was going to be this huge success, but that it wasn't. But I think you can clearly make games like that with smaller budgets, and people that want to play them will play them. Um, Smaller budget games are dominating right now. I think the era of triple A, huge, massive budget, overinflated video games is going to have to come to an end pretty soon, because it seems like the pretty much, not always, but pretty much every year, the most dominant games are smaller indie games and projects that are born of just love for games and for what the story they're trying to tell. Obviously my mind drifts to Expedition 33. Um, and this year, I mean, we had something like Mina the Hollower, which has been a massive success. People love that game. And I just feel like we're gonna be moving away from these sort of AAA games outside of the live service space, because Fortnite's not going anywhere. Obviously, um, I think League of Legends is pretty healthy, probably still. There's always going to be these sort of live service giants, but outside of that, I think indie games are going to become like the normal thing. Mecha Chameleon right now is obviously massive, and that's like a $6 game that was made on a tight budget. So anyway, regardless, Xbox is talking about canceling out a whole bunch of games and shutting down a bunch of studios and laying a bunch of people off, which is really sad. But I think Xbox overinvested and then underproduced, and they haven't been able to make their money back on those investments. Um, Another big piece of news for people that's really sad is Bungie having to discontinue Destiny 2 because they invested all this money into Marathon, and Marathon is just not successful. And so they're having to shut down basically half the studio and quit working on Destiny 2, even though Destiny 2 is one of the most beloved games ever made and has a really dedicated fan base. They just can't keep up with it. So that kind of stuff is sad, and we've been getting a lot of this news from video games lately, and so it just kind of leaves a kind of a pit in our stomachs as gamers, because we don't like hearing all this negativity. We want to hear about how exciting video games are, and how there's all these great new games that we should be looking forward to. And the next console cycle is supposed to be coming up pretty soon. Obviously the Switch 2 recently launched, but we're clearly on the verge of looking at a PlayStation 6 and whatever the Xbox is going to be doing. And so we want to be talking about these exciting things. And like Summer Game Fest was supposed to be this like reinvigoration, but post Summer Game Fest we're really left with this. It's really kind of sad, the state of video game news right now. People are really people feel not hopeful about the future of video games. Obviously we have GTA 6 coming, which is going to be this massive success. Like, it's going to be the best-selling game ever. But that's like one game, and I also have this sinking feeling that GTA 6 is going to be a point of contention because it doesn't come with GTA Online, and that's going to be like a separate paid service, very likely. And I hesitate to immediately give GTA 6 a bunch of credit as this amazing video game when it could be bad. Like, there's always the chance that it's not good, and there's always the chance that it does things people don't like. And so we can't just immediately assume that it's going to be massive critical success, we can assume it's going to be a huge commercial success at launch, but it I don't know. I just have this weird feeling about GTA 6 like it's going to be this massive game, this huge financial bomb, not bomb, financial explosion for video games. It's going to inject all of this money into video games. People are going to buy consoles to play GTA, but at the same time, there's just something about it. And I think it's because, as I mentioned, that the tone around video game news right now is just so somber, and there's been so much bad news that it's hard to feel positive about something, even something as monumental. And I do not say that word lightly. I mean, like, one of the biggest, if not the biggest, video game release of all time in GTA 6. It's hard to be excited about that when a lot of the news we've been hearing about video games has not been good lately. We're not in a golden era right now. We are very much in an like iron age of video games at the moment, where there's contention among the gamer fan base. Like, we've split into factions. There's, I don't even need to mention it. There's clearly people that prefer one type of game versus other types of games. There's clearly people that see certain types of creative choices in games as being not up to their standards. It's hard to mention. It's hard to talk about this without just going fully into it, but I don't want to create a huge discussion about that. But yeah, it's pretty clear that the gamer fan base is fractured, and there's there's divides even between the younger audience and the older audience in terms of like what they're playing, and the older audience really wants the traditional old school games. The older audience, people in their 30s and above, are the ones that are really upset about this physical games thing. But there are probably kids playing video games that have been playing video games for 10 years that have never purchased a physical video game, and they don't have any sense of what that is or why you would care. And so there's clearly a divide there. And so, I think part of the solution for getting past this and finding a better, finding a more positive outlook on games is going to be finding ways to bridge this gap between the different factions within the gaming community, and between publishers and developers and gamers, because that divide is ever increasing. We need to find ways to have discussions about these things in a calm way, and sort of, again, try to bridge this gap, find ways for gaming to be exciting for everyone in different ways, and not let it devolve into this set of like faction wars and class wars, and not have it devolve into these really horrible discussions about layoffs and studio closures. And because all these developers work really hard on these games, but budgets are so inflated now for really no good reason. And if a game's not monumentally successful, then it's not successful at all. And so it kind of, yeah, it's weird. I personally, so I've been playing a lot of games lately that seem to come from smaller, more niche fan bases, but they also tend to have these like really routine, very um, consistent release schedules. So, for example, Atelier and Trails from Gust and Falcom. These are games with huge series, with like over a dozen games each, that come out like every year, sometimes twice a year. And their publishers and developers are really good about keeping this sort of constant cadence of these games coming out, and they're fairly low budget. So when they are successful, when you get something like Atelier Ryza, which sold really well, or when you get something like Trails in the Sky First Chapter, which is an incredible game, and they sell really well. What it is this it it's a pleasant surprise for the developers, but they know that they have these consistent fan bases that will keep coming back to these games and buying them and playing them because we love these games, and they come out fairly frequently. There was a time when Final Fantasy games were coming out every year, when we were getting a new Dynasty Warriors game almost every year, sometimes multiple times a year. There were times when we were getting, Nintendo games at a much faster clip than we do now. But these things have slowed way, way, way down because the budgets are super inflated, the development times are super inflated for a lot of these games. Kingdom Hearts is another great example. Dragon Quest is another great example of games that they take forever to make now. And the investment is so huge and it takes so long that if they don't make back a huge amount of money on that investment, it is perceived as a failure. Whereas these smaller budget games that can come out more frequently, once a year, once every 2 years or whatever, RGG Studios is another studio that is pumping out games every year and people buy them. And those smaller games sort of keep infusing money back into the studio so they can keep making games. And sometimes you get enough money to make your big project. RGG's got Stranger Than Heaven that they're making, which is obviously this big, huge project. And so like you're going to get the ability to make the games that people want to play, and you don't have to invest 7 years and $300 million into making this huge project that it has to sell 10 million copies in order to be profitable. You can make these smaller scale games and enough people that want to play those types of games will play them. I think sometimes studios and developers are just looking for their thing to be the next big thing. And they feel like if they invest a bunch into it, then they can make the next Baldur's Gate 3 or God of War or whatever. But like, it's not going to happen probably. Like the chances of that happening are really low. But if you make smaller games that you can make fairly frequently and establish a fan base for your game, then you can build up enough that you can continue to make the games that you want to make and not rely on them being these massive, huge, overinflated projects. That's just my opinion. Obviously, I'm not a game developer. I'm not in the industry. I'm not a publisher. I don't know all of the ins and outs. But it just seems like this is the direction that people should be heading with their games. Because personally, I don't want to wait 8 years between Final Fantasy games. I don't want to wait a decade between Kingdom Hearts games. I don't want to wait, 6, 7 years, whatever it's going to be until the next mainline Dynasty Warriors game. I don't want to wait that long, you know? And so it's and Zelda and 3D Mario and stuff like that. It's like, well, these things take forever. I'm going to be in my 40s before the next Zelda game comes out. It's crazy. So I just feel like, developers and publishers need to reassess how they're making games and find ways to lower the cost and the time investment in making games and just make games that are a little bit smaller in scope maybe, but that are fun and fan pleasing and that we want to buy and play to support those developers. Just my opinion. Anyway, that was a fairly lengthy discussion. I didn't mean to go into this big tirade about games, but it just was part of the news this week. So I think I'm going to call it there for this week in things I care about for the week of July 4th. Happy Independence Day, Americans. And I'm going to go head to the beach so we can watch the fireworks show. And I will see you guys next week. Bye-bye.